Jerry.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And what you all don't see is that we've got somebody that put a speaker in Elizabeth's office and it plays random noises just to see if we can throw her off. It's how we entertain ourselves here at the League. Good morning, everybody. Those of you that have not met me, I'm the executive director of the League, Jerry Deshane, been with you about 10 years now. And the experts that you're going to be hearing from in just a couple of minutes have been our partners, I think, for just about that long. Lori Richards and I were kind of scratching our heads. The League, by the way, that strange noise, if you can hear it, our fire alarm just went off in our building. I think it's a test. Yep, it's a test, but it'll be a little distracting. The League, first of all, we understand that elections are as much a communications challenge these days as they are a logistical challenge. And first of all, we thank you and we salute you for the tremendous work you do with that. But we thought it would be useful to offer some help on the communication side to the extent that we can. And to that effect, we turn to our partners at Mueller Communications. If you've not heard of the firm, you've probably never engaged a communications consulting firm because they are, if not the best, definitely in the top two or three in Wisconsin. Mueller Communications has a long-standing reputation as just a high-quality firm. They're really good at advising. The League very quietly offers what we call crisis consulting to our leadership. If you have something on the scale of, say, an officer-involved shooting or an unfortunate riot or something like that, we will often quietly introduce Miller to the mayor of your community or the police chief, and they provide some backroom consulting and advice that has been incredibly valuable. So we just have a lot of faith in these people, and I first of all want to thank them for agreeing to put on this training for you, and I know you are going to get a lot out of it because I've learned a lot from them over the years. So with that, I turn it over, and we rehearsed this, Lori, but I don't remember if I turn it over to you or to Elizabeth. So I'm just going to say, please welcome Elizabeth Hummich and Lori Richards.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I'll grab it from here, and Elizabeth will continue to tag team through this presentation today. So first and foremost, thank you to you, Jerry, and to your team at the League. Again, it's always been a pleasure working with you, and as a deeply committed agency that really loves this state, our work that we do with the League and all of our municipal partners is some of the most important that we do. We love these communities. We live in these communities. We've been raised here and are raising our families here. So to see them thrive and help them navigate through challenging situations is some of the most important work that we do. So with that being said, good morning. I'm Lori Richards. I'm CEO here at Mueller Communications. My colleague Elizabeth will introduce herself in just a minute, but as Jerry suggested, she and I, despite our very youthful looks, have been helping partners navigate crises in the state of Wisconsin for more than 20 years now. So we have a lot of good experience, both navigating crises, but also keeping up to speed with the changing media in our state, which we know this is sort of today's topic is really at the confluence of those two issues, right? Challenging elections and the media. So we're excited to dig in with you all today. Elizabeth?
Hi, good morning. I'm Elizabeth Hummich. The last name looks scarier than it sounds when you actually say it out loud. But I am Vice President here at Mueller Communications. Really glad to be joining you this morning. I salute all of you for being in the roles that you're in. It's really important now more than ever. And so really happy to walk through this presentation today with all of you.
Yes, and just a couple of sort of points that we want to stress going into today's training. So we recognize and acknowledge the important work that you all do. In any year, it's critical work. In this year, it is absolutely essential. So we want to acknowledge what important work you all are doing. And by no means you will see as we get into today's training, by no means are we here to tell you that we know how to do your jobs. Our job here today is to be a resource for you, to help maybe explain some of those issues that you've been encountering with the media, give you a little bit more insight into what motivates them, and then to help you prepare for, give you some resources as we enter more deeply into this election season that will help you feel more prepared and more confident going into some of those situations. So as we dig in, please know as well, some of the resources and feedback that we'll be sharing with you, again, is not just coming from us. It's been informed actually recently, just yesterday, we were at a presentation by Megan Wolf and the Wisconsin Election Commission. So a lot of what you see reflected here will be stats and figures and data that you're more familiar with than we are, but we think, again, should be top of mind and quick, easy key facts for the upcoming election season. And then just lastly, Elizabeth, do you want to talk about interactivity and dropping in questions throughout?
If we want to go to the next slide, bottom line is we want this to be a dialogue today, as much of a dialogue as a webinar can be. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. You can use the Q&A feature for that. I know Elizabeth outlined that at the start of the call, but we'll be monitoring that as we go. You can also use the chat function. And today, just to run through our agenda, we're going to talk about the role of a spokesperson, what makes the media tick, some key techniques for answering questions, and we'll also discuss some of the responses to the survey that was circulated in advance of this session that many of you responded to. Next slide, please. Before we talk about how best to understand and work with the media, we want to just set the stage for our conversation. As Lori said, we are here today because as an election clerk, many throughout the community, including your neighbors and your friends and even the local media, they're going to look to you as an expert on elections and the election process. So as a spokesperson, it's really important that you lead with your expertise. You know these things. You have been trained in these things. Stay away from speculation, stick to the facts, and correct misconceptions. So first, we're going to talk about what makes news, so we can have a better sense for what a reporter is looking for when he or she reaches out to you. There's a bit of a formula to what makes news. First, it needs to impact the population that the news outlet serves in terms of election-related stories. There's broad population impact. So stories are going to be of interest to reporters. That is kind of set on fire with the RNC here. Next, it needs to be locally relevant, which can include taking a national topic and finding local angles. The election is excellent example of nationwide issue that can be localized down to the community. There needs to be an emotional connection. You have to be able to answer, why do I care? Here, there's an obvious answer here. Why do you care? Because it impacts the future of our communities and the country as a whole. There's also the issue of driving ratings and selling papers, which we can't ignore. It is driving newsrooms across the state. So often reporters are asking, will a story about a given topic lead to clicks or shares? When it comes to election-related coverage, it's everything that people are talking about. It sells. And lastly, there needs to be the basic W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of a story.
Great. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about your role in all of this. So we know you all are operating in extraordinary times and under extraordinary circumstances, especially this year in this election season. So the work that you all are doing, obviously, in addition to your daily duties in answering all of these questions and engaging with the media, is so important. But we know that it can feel like maybe it's distracting from your day-to-day work of keeping elections safe. So again, our goal is to give you some tips and tricks to kind of make that part of your job just a little bit easier. So we wanted to highlight some research. You'll see here along the bottom that in 2020, the Ad Council did some research and asked the American public questions about election security. One of the interesting pieces of information that they got back from this research was, when asked, the average American citizen tells us that they trust local election officials to inform us about elections. They're referred to as trusted messengers. Also ranking very high in this polling data are local news media. But we know that you are often the ones informing the local news media. So again, that's why your role in this election is especially critical, because we know you're not only informing your citizenry directly, but also the local news media as well.
So next, we're going to dive into just a little bit more of a robust discussion about how best to work with the media. We won't go too far into detail here, but want to start by calling out the different types of news or stories and the fact that they come to life in different ways. So we've got proactive and reactive. Proactive options are numerous and really dependent on the story and the opportunity. This is news that we want to share. So we'll leverage multiple formats and outreach opportunities. This is holding a news conference. This is distributing a news release. This is inviting the media in for an interview. On the reactive side, this is news that we don't necessarily want to share. In this case, standby statements and written responses are best. Standby statements and written responses, which we'll talk about throughout the morning, really allows us to be careful and intentional with our wording. It ensures that every outlet gets the same most recent information, and it doesn't put you in a challenging interview situation.
And in the pre-survey that many of you filled out, there were a number of suggestions that when you work solo, so those of you representing smaller municipalities, have suggested, I work solo, I'm getting pulled in a lot of directions anyway, and now I'm getting all of these questions from reporters. It's really hard to manage all of this. So in these situations, something to think about, or that we want to have you consider as we go through the training today, is putting together a standby statement. Some of you also suggested that one of your concerns is that the media may take an interview with you and selectively pull out a quote, or maybe take something out of context in a way that misinterprets what you intended versus what they've published. So a standby statement, having something in writing that really sets forth a clear position about whether it's election security or something very specific like Badger books, for example, or we know the Wisconsin Election Commission is going to be putting forth some additional information clarifying drop boxes, for example. So these can be topics ahead of time that you can put together a standby statement, maybe a couple of sentences or a paragraph about your high level position on this. And you can use it in some of those reactive situations. Should you get an email from a reporter just to say, here's our or my position on this specific topic, and you can send it out in writing. It might be a good time saver for you as well and alleviate some of those anxieties about being misrepresented or misquoted.
And we're talking a lot about the media today, kind of the purpose of our session, but note that how you talk to the media is also how you can talk to the community. So preparing a standby statement for media use is also preparing a statement that you can use when you get a question from a community member. So you and people on your teams are all saying the same thing and sticking to those key facts. Let's talk about mastering the interview. Let's say you have a media inquiry, you decide that yes, you want to sit down and do an interview. If that's the path that you want to take with the reporter, here are some tips. A lot of these are common sense, but we'll highlight just a few. First, know your message. It should go without saying, but be prepared. Always have kind of your 2 or 3 top messages that you absolutely want to communicate no matter what. And while you can't script an interview or a Q&A, you can control how you tell your side of the story, and you can anticipate the questions that will be asked and have your key facts ready to respond. Reporters usually shy away from providing questions in advance, but it's always appropriate to see if they can give you a kind of a general idea of what they're interested in, what they'd like covered, so you can better prepare for an interview situation. Next, consider appearances, especially when it comes to TV interviews. Think about how you're physically communicating your message. Are you nervous and fidgeting? Are you combative or kind of defensive in your posture? Do your best to visually present yourself as the expert. What's great about TV interviews, although they usually make people a little nervous, what's great about a TV interview is that you get to communicate both with your words as well as with your actions and your appearance. So it's easier for a listener, a viewer to relate to you. You need to take advantage of that in a TV interview situation.
And just a quick note to jump in here as well. Sorry, Elizabeth, but Megan Wolf said something yesterday during the panel discussion that really struck me as being such an important message for you all as election clerks and election officials. And she said, elections are all about transparency. And here at the Election Commission, we want people to have visibility into everything we do. That's why we allow poll workers and election observers. We encourage all of those things. I thought that transparency message was so strong and important right now. And to Elizabeth's point, you communicate openness and transparency, not just with your words, but also with your body language. So you may say transparency, but if you're really defensive in your posture or in your demeanor with a reporter, it doesn't necessarily come through. So consider that as well.
Mm-hmm. Next, listen to the questions, be an active participant in the interview. We're going to talk about some ways to kind of formulate answers to questions that a reporter might ask. But the most important thing is to first listen, pause if necessary. We're going to say this a couple times this morning. It is okay to take a moment to gather your thoughts. When you are in the thick of an interview, you know, your adrenaline is high and you want to just kind of respond off the spot and be, you know, obviously working with that reporter. It's okay to take a breath, to say, you know, that's a really great question. Let me think about that, and make sure that you deliver your key fact. To underscore what Lori said, be clear, be concise, be honest. If you don't know the answer, don't speculate. Just state that you don't have that information right now, but you can work with someone to get that information and share it with the reporter. Support your messages, have your key facts. You know, this is a topic where we've got a lot of statistics. We have a lot of facts. Know them, have them with you. And lastly, forget no comment. This is something that we tell people all the time. Just forget it. No comment doesn't exist. Because saying no comment actually implies that you have something to say, but you can't say it. So instead, consider saying something like, I don't have that information right now, but I can look into it, or I'm going to have to get back to you after I do some research on that. It's always okay to not have the answers. It's better to be honest instead of speculating or spitballing. And kind of our rule of thumb here at Mueller Communications is a reporter isn't your friend, but they're also not your enemy. They have a job to do. And often if you help them do it, you can do so in a way that tells your story and, you know, lets them cover a really important topic. And that's a win-win.
Right. And in addition to, again, as an alternative to the no comment, which we're going to take out of our vernacular, we know that a lot of what you all are acting on and implementing in your communities, again, it's coming to you from the state level, from the Wisconsin Election Commission. So another good alternative there is, you know, those decisions are actually being decided right now or being discussed right now by the Wisconsin Election Commission. So that question would be best directed to them. That's another good alternative.
Thank you, Lori. Want to talk next about an ideal answer when working with the media, because it's a little backwards when we think about how we usually tell a story. So people in business, for example, will often tell a story with kind of a slow build. They're getting to the main point, and then they've got their big finish. You introduce the basics of an idea, you build your case, and then you deliver it. In the media, though, headlines reveal the big idea first, and then kind of fill in details at the end, almost in the style of an inverted pyramid. So you start general, then you get into more narrow specifics, and your story progresses. So it's really important when you speak to a reporter that you do the same. Reveal your big idea, what you want to appear in the headline, and then fill in the additional information.
Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise right now using that sort of fun graphic that Elizabeth presented. So we're going to answer the same question 2 different times. Keep in mind, both of the answers to this question are accurate and honest and truthful and contain facts. However, one may cause people to snooze and you run the risk of your key message not being pulled out of this long answer. The other will show you how to be a little bit more concise, to front load your key points, where it's much more likely that the quote that gets pulled out of your interview is the one that you want to be featured. So one other small note to consider as we jump into this example that we didn't highlight is you can often spend 15 or 20 minutes with a reporter conducting an interview. We do this all the time with clients, and then they'll say, but literally there was one sentence from that whole interview that made the paper. How is that possible? That's your soundbite. It's not uncommon to have 20 minutes of dialogue with a reporter, but then really only have something like 25 words or 7 to 10 seconds, if you're doing a broadcast interview, actually be clipped and make the final report or make the final news story. So that's why it's so important that you cut through all of the clutter and make it really clear to the reporter what your main message is. Okay. With that being said, Elizabeth, do you want to be my reporter and give me the question, and then I'll give a couple of different answers.
Yeah, here we go. All ballots, whether cast in person or absentee, are counted and processed. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. I'm cheating and reading your answer. How are votes counted, Lori Richards?
How are votes counted? Great question. So all ballots, whether cast in person or absentee, are counted and processed through a careful procedure that election officials meticulously follow. On election day, we rely on the poll book, a comprehensive list of all registered voters assigned to our polling place. When voters arrive, they must publicly state their name and address and present a valid photo ID. Once we've verified their registration and ID, they sign the poll book and receive their ballot. The voting process itself is completely private. No identifying information is ever attached to the actual ballot. After making their choices, voters feed their ballots directly into the tabulator machine to be counted toward election results. Now, absentee ballots follow a similar verification process and are counted on election day. We inspect each absentee envelope. Okay, I'm only halfway through this answer, right? It's all, yes, thank you. It's all, I know you all are following and you're all wide awake to that answer because it's exactly what you do. But I promise you, you probably lost half of reporters by now. So Katie, if you'll flip to the next slide. And because they're not experts in what you do, they're unsure which of the key messages to grab from that answer. So you can see from the example here, we've just some of these answers are just a little too wordy, perhaps. And we do use some jargon in this response. We refer to poll books, again, which you all know about, but that's something that's pretty specific that probably requires a definition for a reporter, and that's just going to add to the length. So something like poll book or some of those more specific details, those should go kind of toward the bottom of your response. Those are the specific supporting points that you want to add in should a reporter have a follow-up question. Again, we want to break this answer into sound bites, which are more like 7 seconds long. What you see at the bottom of this slide is our ta-da message was so far at the bottom, I didn't even get to it. And it's this. This entire process is transparent and open for public observation. After the polls close, we review the signed poll book, manually update. Sorry, the ta-da moment was this entire process is safe, secure, and accurate. That should be the first sentence of our response. Start with the big idea and then start narrowing down and giving some more specific details that illustrate why it's true. Okay, so we're going to do this one more time. I'm going to
nail it. Are you ready? Okay.
Yeah.
How are votes counted?
Well, as an election official, I can attest that the vote counting process in Wisconsin is safe, secure, and accurate. We have tried and tested systems in place to ensure votes are cast fairly and counted correctly. Now I get into some more details. It's important to know that no ballot, either in person or absentee, gets counted until we've confirmed the voter's identity, that that voter is eligible to vote in Wisconsin, and that the individual has not already voted in this election. This process is meticulously observed and scrutinized by your friends and neighbors and coworkers that act as poll workers and election observers from all political parties. They work hard to keep our elections fair and take that responsibility very seriously. Now, again, if a reporter has specific questions about what you just delivered, they may dig in and say, tell me more about the role of an election observer, for example. And then you can get into more specifics. But it's really important that your first response, again, is high level and really delivers the soundbite that's likely to make the news story.
Lori, we've got a question from one of our participants here. If the media records 20 minutes of interview time and they only use 1 minute, I'm assuming that they own that footage and could use that footage a year later. What if the footage that they choose a year later is no longer accurate?
It is true, and it's my understanding that they do own that footage. But I will tell you, in my experience in working with the media, sometimes they will use what's called B-roll, which is really just like, for example, landscape footage or a sign of your community, the population sign, the municipal incorporated in like a incorporation sign, something like that. I don't know that I've ever encountered a situation where the media has pulled an interview that is a year old and reused that, especially in a situation where the information may fall in or out of date or in and out be challenged legally the way elections have been challenged legally. Elizabeth, anything to add to that?
I think the only times that I've seen it, it's been very clear that it's older footage, something like, and, 1 year ago when we sat down with XYZ, here's what they had to say about election security at the time, or something along those lines. B-roll can get outdated quickly. So, that's another place where if you have a relationship with the media in your community, you can invite them in to take B-roll even before election day. Make sure that you're comfortable with everything that is being shown, but invite them in to get B-roll because then they can use that for their election coverage and that it's current and that what you're showing them you're comfortable with. So that's another approach as well, but kind of takes a relationship with a reporter to be able to kind of put out that idea.
And that's a great point, Elizabeth, especially depending on how your community uses technology. For example, in elections, it is very possible that media may use old B-roll. So you may now be using a completely different system or more technology. But if media uses B-roll of an older election, it may look a little different in a way that people may question. So there may be some value to having that openness and transparency with a reporter to say, if you'd like to come in and film, we'd welcome that, just to get some B-roll of how elections are conducted in our community.
Also, some of your municipalities might have a videographer on site, or to be candid, an iPhone takes great video. You can also produce your own B-roll and provide that to outlets. Just as a FYI, if you want some new footage, here's what we've got. It might look different than what you've captured in the past. That is certainly something that you could do as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's continue the conversation about quotability. The best way to maximize your quotability is to know what your quote is before the interview. So identify your key fact or top line message that you want to share, and then make sure that above any other information that you share, that main point gets hammered home. So as Lori mentioned, really important to avoid jargon or technical language. You need to make your quote digestible to a general audience. You have to remember who the reporter is reporting to, and make sure that however you frame your response is accurate and timely, but also digestible to someone who doesn't have the background that you have. Front load your strong points. Again, establish your agenda up front and make that most important message said as soon as possible. You don't want to run into a situation where the reporter reaches the end of their questions and you didn't get the opportunity to deliver your top line message. So find a way to deliver your top line message, and we'll talk about that next. When we talk about using transition skills like bridging and flagging. And just remember, quotes are meant to be brief. It can feel so uncomfortable to just stop, but say what you need to say and stop. Keep your comments direct and to the point. Speak in sound bites that are easily translated into quotes for a news story.
And just to reiterate a point that Elizabeth just made, it is a sort of well-known reporter technique to those of us who work with them on a regular basis. That's called dead air. So oftentimes a reporter will just leave sort of silence on the table. You may have delivered your soundbite and you've stopped speaking, and it'll take the reporter 5, maybe 10 seconds to ask you another question. That's often done intentionally with the hope that you'll continue to fill that silence with additional details or maybe more information that you didn't necessarily plan on getting into, right? So going off script just a little bit. Silence is okay. Don't be tempted to continue speaking if you feel like you've delivered your key message. You run the risk of diluting that key message, and again, having the soundbite that you really hope makes the news story be diluted with something else that you've said. So if you know yourself well enough that you're uncomfortable with silence and you feel tempted to fill that void, ask the reporter, do you have any other questions for me, or is it time to wrap it up? So ask a question back to the reporter to sort of break the silence and keep the interview moving, rather than fall temptation or give into the temptation to keep speaking after you've delivered your key message.
So as I mentioned, next we're going to talk about what we call bridging and flagging. If we were in the room, I would say, who's ever heard of bridging and flagging? And probably not a lot of hands would go up, but I guarantee that you've heard this many, many times. So one of the most common mistakes in an interview situation is that you get so fixated on the question that you become a passive respondent. Rather, it's better to listen to kind of the bigger issue behind each question and then address that broader issue with a key message or a key fact. It's always appropriate and in your best interest to, again, briefly address the specific question and then use a bridging phrase to move to your key message. So you want to acknowledge the question, you want to transition, and then deliver your key fact. And we do that with bridging and flagging. A bridge helps you direct a question to a key fact. This is where maybe a question comes from a negative point of view or gets into a topic that you really don't feel comfortable with. A couple of phrases that we use as a bridge are things like, let me put that question in perspective. And then you can deliver a key fact, a key message. Or, that's a really interesting question, but the real issue is XYZ. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, go ahead, Lori.
I'm going to jump in here too. So I'm kind of a sports gal. I often use sports analogies, and bridges, if you think about it, are a really important tool to put you on offense when you're working with reporters. When Elizabeth talks about becoming a passive respondent, I think about that as being sort of in a defensive position with a reporter. They ask the questions, you answer the questions, but a bridge can put you back on offense. So that puts you in the position of delivering the message that you want to deliver, especially when we're talking about your role as clerks, and especially when we're talking about this particular election season. You all have shared in some of your survey feedback, and we know from looking at you're receiving misinformed questions. You're receiving questions that, again, are based in things that are not true. You're receiving probably some level of inappropriate questions, right? There's a lot of questions and talk about voter eligibility, for example, and people are taking that in places that may be inappropriate or uncomfortable. Bridges are also ways that you can avoid going negative where other people have gone negative, and you can just shift your answer back to the facts around that particular election issue. So we'll give some specific examples, but it's a really helpful tool.
Yep. So that's bridging. On the other hand, we have flagging. And this is where the reporter kind of throws you a softball question. It directly aligns with a key fact or the quote that you have prepared, and you want to make sure that they hear it, that they pay attention. That's where a flag comes in. It's kind of the here it comes technique. And these are phrases like, oh, I'm so glad you asked that question because XYZ, or, what's really important for you to remember is, and then deliver your message. So if we go to the next slide, we've got just a kind of a laundry list of some of these phrases that you should familiarize yourself with. And again, we are talking about the media today, but this is conversation skills for anyone that you're talking with about elections. So for bridging and flagging, some phrases that we use, what I really want to talk to you about is, or what's most important about that question, or I need to look into that issue and get back to you. But what I can say is X, Y, and Z. And, when we talk about elections, it can be really challenging because it is complex and there are steps. So it's also appropriate to both talk about the system as a whole. So kind of bring the reporter's question back up to the larger issue of elections, or to break it down for them and say, first, here's what happens. Let me illustrate the safeguards that are in place. First, before someone can request an absentee ballot, they have to register to vote. Second, their eligibility is double checked before they receive a ballot. And lastly, it's got to be signed by a witness, a U.S. citizen, to confirm that the voter did what they needed to do. So use some of these phrases when you do have to answer a procedural question to kind of break it up into these pieces.
And one more thing to add here as well, you'll see some of these phrases, they kind of allow you to go in different directions. We know that some questions that you're receiving probably can't be answered immediately. So for example, we know that, again, the Election Commission is meeting next week to provide you all with additional guidance on ballot drop boxes. So if you get questions about that, it's really important that you have a bridge and you're able to say, it's a really great question, but the reality is I won't have instruction on that topic until we hear from the Election Commission next week, things like that. So just, again, what are those common phrases that you can use to direct back to your key message?
Yep. So now we're going to look at a couple examples of bridging and flagging. So here I will read the question again, Lori, and have you respond, but you can see it on the screen here. I don't even like reading this question, but it would to be in line with some of the questions that you might get, unfortunately. So how can you be sure that illegals don't vote in Wisconsin elections?
I know that's been a topic that's been on some people's minds, but it's important to remember that voter ID has been in place in our state for more than a decade to ensure that only eligible voters vote in elections. That means that there are checks and balances in place to confirm voter eligibility, including proof of residency and identity, which are required to vote in all Wisconsin elections, regardless of voting method.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of things to unpack in that Q&A example. So one, to Elizabeth's point, I hated even typing the question or framing the question the way that we framed it. But again, we want this to be very realistic and to reflect what you all are telling us that you're seeing and hearing. So the first rule, and one of the things that we really wanted to demonstrate, is don't repeat the negatives or the stereotypes that may be presented to you as part of the question. If you repeat it back, it could be part of the soundbite, and we don't want that for you. And a less skilled interviewer could get pulled into an immigration or citizenship discussion by the question if they, again, repeat that information, rather than moving right into the key message that you want to deliver about the security of the system in place. So again, don't repeat the negative. Think about using a bridge. And in this situation, I use the bridge of saying, I know that's been a topic on people's minds, but it's important to remember. And then I shifted right into something I'm comfortable talking about, which is voter ID, how it works, and why it's helpful, or why it's an important part of the check and balance in our system.
Next question. In the last presidential election, questions were raised about the security of voting machines. How confident are you that these machines are secure?
I'm glad you asked that question. So there's my flag. I'm glad you asked this question because it's crucial that your audience knows that machine tabulation is secure and accurate. So that's my main point. That's what I hope to be the soundbite. And then I'm going to deliver some supporting facts. As with all voting technology, tabulators are subject to many security protections and are certified before they're used, typically by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Ballot tabulators allow election officials to count votes from ballots quickly and accurately. Impartial officials, so officials from both parties, carefully follow established procedures to ensure that exactly one vote per eligible voter is counted.
Got just one more example here.
And I'm going to just check in. What about indefinitely confined? There is a question here that I do not know the answer to, so we may have to look into that and get back to you. But okay, sorry.
Got it. Thank you. Next question. How do you ensure that the absentee voting process is safe and secure?
Mhm. If people remember one thing from our talk today, it should be this: all voting methods are safe and secure. Again, that's a really strong flag you can use. That's obviously in a situation where I'm working with likely a printer broadcast reporter, but that's a really strong flag. So if people remember one thing from our talk today, it should be this: all voting methods are safe and secure. All ballots, including absentee ballots, are verified and counted by your local impartial election officials from all political parties. There are a number of protections to make sure that each ballot matches an eligible voter and is counted accurately. So I'm going to list a few off for you here if you'd like them, but here's how that breaks down. So again, this is where that listing technique that Elizabeth talked about can really come into play, because when you break things down more into a list, it's a little bit more digestible for a reporter. And then we can get into our list here. First, ballots are paper and hand counted. Any changes to how they've been filed would be apparent. Next, ballots are sealed, and the seal can be examined for any suspicion of tampering. Third, ballots can be securely returned through the mail or at drop-off locations. And then lastly, ballots are handled securely by bipartisan teams with video surveillance when absentee ballots are processed and counted. So again, just an example of high message first, flag what you want to be your soundbite, and then break it down into more smaller details if the question warrants.
Mm-hmm. We've got a question in the Q&A, just again about us using the word illegal. We agree with that, that it is appropriate. We wanted to be able to demonstrate that you shouldn't repeat that negative labeling that might come across with a community member or maybe with an unskilled member of the media. So really our goal there was to make us all really uncomfortable, and then kind of pivot into more positive messaging.
Yes. Again, we want to underscore, we would never use that word, and by no means do we advocate using that word in any way, shape, or form. But some of what we saw that was submitted in the pre-training survey was that you all are faced with tough questions like this. And we wanted to emphasize again that please don't repeat those things or use those things proactively, but how you pivot away from them. Thank you, Elizabeth.
And another question we've got in here, should we say that all voting methods are safe and secure, which insinuates all voting, or should we break it down into our specific communities and focus on the safety and security of voting methods within a community? I think that's a really great question. I think it somewhat depends on the outlet. I mean, I think overall we want to ensure people that Black and white elections are safe and secure, and that is at every level. But what you can speak to in your expertise is your community. So again, when we talk about what makes news and we talked about how it's a national story but localized, that's where you come in. This is a national story across the country. We need to know that we can trust our elections. Here in XYZ municipality, this is what that looks like. We do these things every time that we have an election. So it's a little bit of a both and. Okay.
And I see one more question here about video surveillance while processing absentee ballots, ? I believe we may have taken that talking point from a specific community that maybe has larger, I'm not sure if that's a Milwaukee Central Count talking point, something, obviously that is location specific. If it is not accurate in your community, obviously don't use that specific talking point.
Great. So now we're going to move in and want to just watch somebody practice some of these techniques. It's just helpful to see someone kind of masterfully deliver some bridges and flags. So we'll watch this video.
Just a little while ago, Judy sat down with top Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg.
Sheryl Sandberg, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you for coming to Facebook.
So Facebook acknowledged yesterday that most of your 2 billion users could have had their profile, their personal profile information harvested, stolen. That is a stunningly damaging piece of information, isn't it?
Well, let's be clear what happened here. In this case, we had a feature that enabled you to find your friends. You could find their friends by their name or their email or their phone number. That was a good use and really important to a lot of people. People who should not have scraped that data and made a directory of it. But what matters here is that all of the information they received was already public. They did not scrape any private data. So it was information people had already listed on Facebook publicly. Now, that doesn't make it okay. We shut down this use case. We're glad we found it. But it was not private data for all of those people.
So was damage done by this or not?
Well, this plays into the overall situation we're in, which is people not trusting how data is used on Facebook. And we know that we did not do a good enough job protecting people's data. I'm really sorry for that, and Mark's really sorry. And we're taking strong action. In fact, that announcement is part of the strong action we're taking. We announced 2 weeks ago that we were going to take a very broad look at how Facebook data was used. We were going to find problems, shut them down, and tell people about it. And that's why that announcement happened. But that's not all we're doing. We've shut down many other use cases in groups and events and pages and search. And starting Monday, we'll begin rolling out to everyone in the world on Facebook at the top of their newsfeed a very clear and easy way to see what apps they've shared their data with and an easy way to delete those. And as part of that, we're going to let people know if their data might have been accessed by Cambridge Analytica.
And I want to ask you about that, but why weren't these steps taken sooner? And is there any chance that right now data is being lifted, taken, harvested that people don't want?
It's a really important question. And I think the answer on why this didn't happen sooner really goes back to what Facebook was trying to do. We were very focused for the last 10 years on building social experiences. And those are important. Those are why your friends know it's your birthday, why you can share playlists. But we were not focused enough on the possible misuses of data. When we saw specific problems, we shut those specific problems down. So in the Cambridge Analytica case, the friends of friend sharing that enabled that, we shut that down.
Okay, for those of you following along with Cheryl, who is a masterful interviewer, any observations about her use of bridging and flagging? If you noticed anything, please drop it in the chat. One thing to observe from her, we have a couple of good observations that we'd like to point out, because again, she's a very skilled interviewer. Yes, very well practiced, very smooth. One of the things to note is the reporter presented her with a number of questions that logically would have a yes or no answer. One question was, well, that's a stunningly damaging piece of information, isn't it? You would think that the right answer to that might be yes or no. Cheryl didn't deliver or yes or no. She bridged right into, well, let's be clear what happened here, and then provided some larger context about this data scraping issue. So again, a yes or no answer to a reporter's question isn't required. That's sort of the power of the bridge, to move it over if you have more context to deliver. Another question the reporter asked was damage done? And again, you saw in that instance, Cheryl bridged right into a larger explanation of the issue. She did eventually apologize and say, we are sorry for data was released to others, and we're sorry for that. So an apology is important, and an admission when the situation warrants it is also important. But she bridged using the phrase, but what matters here is, and then went into her delivery. Lastly, you heard toward the end, she said something about, it's a really important question. Again, that's a flag for all of us who follow along and work with the media. That was a flag that what she was about to say there was one of her key messages that she really wanted people to pick up on. But your comments are all correct as well. She remained very calm and confident throughout the interview, even though she was digging into some really hard material. She clearly practiced. She clearly went into this interview with her key messages ready, and then using transition phrases, looked for those opportunities to deliver her key messages.
And I'll just underscore the practice part. If you are going to find yourself in an interview situation, find a colleague, find a spouse, find a friend, and go through a mock interview. It can feel really uncomfortable, but wouldn't you rather be uncomfortable with someone you know than a reporter and it ends up on the 5 o'clock news? So sometimes to kind of shake some of those cobwebs off and practice, rehearse some of your responses, it can be really helpful to do kind of a mock interview before you do the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We're transition next into some scenarios and some of the feedback that we got directly from you all. So when we did the training survey, we asked you, what are the questions that you're getting from media? What are the questions that you're getting from citizens in your community? So we can help you to best prepare for this upcoming election season. So here are some of the things that we heard back from you. Katie, next slide, please. We have a general summary of the questions that you asked and that you suggested you're receiving most often. So those are sort of in these 3 buckets: election security, election workers, and vote counting. So you'll see some of the sub bullets here. We again summarized, we got some great feedback. We had nearly, I think, close to 100 responses on the survey. So again, you gave us some really great feedback to make this as custom for you all as we can. But it was really informative to hear from you, the sort of general buckets where you're getting the majority of the questions. Something I want to emphasize as we move next into discussion of key facts, and again, how you can use some of those key facts to feel really prepared to answer questions in these 3 areas, is this point. Sometimes in these exercises, we feel a little bit like broken records because it feels like we repeat the same messages or the same facts over and over again. Again, it's one of those things like the dead air scenario where it feels uncomfortable, but sometimes you just need to kind of own it and break through it a little bit. Because the thing about repeating yourself in these situations with the key facts or the key messages is that the more often you deliver the key message or the key fact, the more likely it is that, one, it's going to be the soundbite that makes the media article or 5 o'clock news. And 2, it's more likely to be remembered by the citizens that you're speaking with or the colleagues that you're talking to, and then repeated by them. So it's more likely to be the message that spreads. Don't feel that sort of broken record sort of anxiety. It's okay to repeat the same thing frequently. It's better, again, that you repeat the key message often than dilute it with additional details if that isn't what people are asking for. So in the next slides, we've helped summarize some of the key facts that we think would be really useful to help respond to questions in these particular areas. These key facts were compiled in a couple of different ways. As I mentioned, we have been working with and taking key messages from the Wisconsin Election Commission. So one of the fact sheets was just posted as well in the chat, which is excellent. And the league has done and continues to do some really fantastic work in this area as well. So one of the things that was sort of at the center for us in summarizing the key facts for you all to use were some of the videos that the league itself did a couple of years ago, which we think are really timely and really relevant. You may see some familiar faces, but we thought we'd play them here as a good refresher as well.
In Wisconsin, the path your ballot travels is thorough.
Every vote has a paper record, and election officials have several steps to ensure voting equipment and ballots are secure.
Clerks work with poll workers to ensure every eligible voter casts only one ballot and that their vote is accurately counted.
We count the votes in the presence of any members of the public that wish to view this process.
For state and federal elections, results are verified 3 times before they're official by municipal, county, and state election officials.
In Wisconsin, we make sure your vote is accurately counted.
Excellent. It's a really good reminder, again, of like how to be succinct with some of these key messages. So revisiting these videos, again, keeping them close at hand for citizens as well, and pointing them to other resources like these are also good techniques to have in your back pocket. All right, Katie, next slide.
In Wisconsin,
Oh, perfect. Sorry. Do we have a second video? Okay, thanks. No? Okay. Okay, perfect. So this is a little bit of an eye chart right now and not intended to be, but we really wanted to try to consolidate it to one slide, because one of the key principles of media training or of working with the media is if you have too many facts that you want to deliver as sort of your key responses, that can sometimes seem a little overwhelming. So while we still have 4, 5, 6 here on the page with some sub bullets, we tried to keep it down to one page, again, to keep it succinct and keep it tight, and hopefully give you a really good resource to work with. So these are also available. The league will have them available to download, that you can keep them close at hand. You can revisit them often, so they're sort of top of mind. Make them your own, customize them for your community. Again, they're meant to be a resource for you, by no means a script, but these are really helpful facts to have close at hand as you go into this election season. Moving forward, what we have prepared for you all and what we're going to spend about the next 15 minutes doing is a couple of mock media scenarios. So in a typical media training scenario, oftentimes we would put you all on the spot. We would present you with a media scenario, maybe a couple of questions, and then we would do a mock back and forth. However, we thought in this circumstance, it might be more helpful to have you watch us execute a couple of potential mock interviews. You can critique us, we can go back and forth, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A at the end as well.
Great. So in this first scenario, I'm a reporter interested in discussing absentee ballots and some of the concerns surrounding them. So Lori, thank you so much for sitting down with me. First question.
Before we jump in, I'm sorry, my job in this scenario is to use as many of those key messages using bridging and flagging and then my goal is to get as many of those key messages into my responses to the reporter as we can. Reporter, sorry, back at you.
No problem. I'm hearing a lot of concerns about absentee ballots. People are asking about it all the time. What do you say to a resident who has concerns about how absentee ballots are counted, when they're counted? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. First, let me start by saying that I've been an election clerk for 14 years, and I've received a lot of training to be sure I'm very familiar with Wisconsin's rules and laws with regard to elections. I can tell you, Wisconsin requires a paper record of every vote that's cast in our state, no matter what kind of ballot or voting equipment is used. So what that means is valid absentee ballots are always counted on election day, no matter if the race is tight or if the race looks like a landslide.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Are absentee ballots more susceptible to fraud just in their very nature of kind of how they're delivered? I've even heard of people trying to register dead family members and filling out absentee ballots for them. Is that something that actually happens?
You've got a lot of questions in that one question, and that's a complex issue. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit. But what's most important to remember is that our electoral process is tried and tested. Here in Wisconsin, we have more election officials monitoring our election process than in any other state. We have nearly 2,000. And our elections have many built-in processes for verification and review before, during, and after a vote, regardless of whether ballots are cast in person or absentee. So that's a big sort of the larger answer to your question about election security overall. But I can break that down for you just a little bit for some of your more specific questions about registering family members and things of that nature. So let me break this down just a little bit to help illustrate all of the safeguards that are in place. First, before a voter can request an absentee ballot, eligible voters must first register to vote. Their information and eligibility is double-checked before they receive a ballot. For an absentee ballot to be considered valid, absentee voters must have a witness. an adult U.S. citizen who can confirm the voter filled out their own ballot. So hopefully that gives you a couple of examples of all the different checks and balances in place to ensure that only registered voters are eligible voters are voting in our state.
Mm-hmm. And who counts the absentee ballots? How is that process monitored?
Our elections start with the everyday Americans that keep elections fair. That's what's really unique about our process. Our election workers, our poll workers, and even our poll observers are our dedicated friends and neighbors in each of our communities that serve as impartial election officials and poll workers. And they play a critical role in making sure that our elections remain fair. The process itself is conducted and monitored by election officials. Trained volunteers and election observers also play a role, but they come from both parties to ensure that elections are secured. And then lastly, from voting machine testing to the counting of absentee ballots, members of the public are welcome to observe the election process along trained local election officials. So anyone really can participate in the process to make sure they feel comfortable and confident with how it's being conducted.
Yeah, that's a great point. Along that line, for some of these observers, I've seen some headlines recently that some of these observers were actually removed from a voting place in Glendale. What's going on there? Is that something that's going to happen in your community?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, that keeps our elections so secure is that anyone can observe any election in any jurisdiction of the state, not just where they live. Again, it's one of the really unique and special things about our election process that keeps it safe. However, there are laws that govern observers to ensure that they're truly observing and not disrupting any election, including, as an example, they must remain at least 3 feet from the voting process if they're observing the voting process. Well, I can't speak directly to what happened in Glendale because that's not my community. In my experience, it's incredibly rare that observers cause disruption, but I imagine if it does happen, the laws will be enforced to ensure safe and secure voting for all.
Great. So that was the first scenario. Would love to see your thoughts in the chat. What did you hear Lori do that kind of illustrated some of the training that we've gone through? Do we have to use cliche phrases when bridging? They sound too disjointed. Like, let's unpack that question. No, you do not have to be cheesy. These are meant to be thought starters. I think across the board, anytime you're dealing with a key message, a key fact, a bridging or transition technique, you need to put it in your own language so it doesn't feel scripted. That is never the intent when you're sitting down with the reporter. So these are all starting points. I find that what works for me is I will often say, oh, that is such a good question. And I say that because it's natural for me, but also it buys me time to think of a response, to think of where to go next. So yes, you don't have to use our suggested bridging and flagging phrases.
Absolutely. And really, this is a tool, this is a resource for you all. But when it becomes most useful is when you take it and you make it your own, right? Make sure it reflects your how you're most comfortable operating. It's funny because even as we prepare for trainings like this, Elizabeth feels more comfortable having more scripting, and I feel a little more comfortable having just bullets, right? So know what you're comfortable with and make sure that you make it your own. In addition, knowing what you're comfortable with means also knowing your role in that interview. And the Glendale question is a really good example. The question was, is that going to, I saw this happen in Glendale. Is that going to happen here? Or what happened there? If you're not the municipal clerk from Glendale, you shouldn't be expected to answer that question. So don't ever feel uncomfortable saying, well, because I'm not there, because that's not my job, I can't speak to that. But I can tell you from my experience, I've never seen it, or if I've seen it, it's only because it actually threatened the security of an election or whatever that might look like. So again, don't feel like the expectation is that you're going to have every answer to every question. It's totally fine to say, that's really out of my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is this.
Great. I think just some of the things that stood out to me in that first question, Lori really led with her experience. She was kind of like, all right, before we get into these answers here, let me set the stage. Know that I've been an election clerk for, I think she said 14 years, and that required a lot of training. So let me just set the stage that my answers have value and meaning and expertise behind them, which was really great. Also, obviously, used a lot of bridging and flagging and answered with a key message and then got into some of the specifics. We've got a question right now. If you're asked many questions phrased as one question, do you ask the reporter to repeat it or boil it down, or do you just repeat the message? I think that's a great question. And I think this is where it's really important to be an active listener, because I think it depends on what the question is. If a reporter throws 3 questions at you and they all align with a key fact, a key message, and you want to deliver them, then I say, let me break that apart for you and take each question separately. If it's a bunch of questions that are kind of on a topic that, maybe you want to avoid or you don't have information on, then I think you can address the larger topic of the question set and then pivot as you see fit.
That's absolutely right. I would agree with that 100%. The reality is, if you provide the reporter with an answer, this is why bridging and flagging also can be really, really successful techniques. If you provide the reporter with an answer that provides value and a valuable potential soundbite for their story, quite often, even if you didn't provide them with the yes or no they may have set you up to offer them, they'll move on to the next question in their interview. I would say maybe in 10% of cases, will a reporter actually ask a follow-up question and say, well, there was one more question that you didn't answer, and that was really specific to absentee ballots or whatever it is. And if that is the case, then you can deliver that specific message separately as well.
We've got another question coming in, and this is a great one. We get it all the time. If a reporter calls to get an interview, they catch you on your cell phone, or they call into your office direct line. Is it okay to ask to schedule a time instead of doing the interview right then? A couple things that we would recommend. First off, if you find yourself in that situation where you are the spokesperson and you get the call directly, it is completely appropriate to say, I want to be responsive to you, but I'm not able to do an interview right at this moment. Can we schedule a time to do so? Absolutely. And I would encourage you to do that, because you can't necessarily be prepared for an interview on the spot. I would also say that what we often recommend is that you don't get direct calls from reporters, which I know can be hard in communities, where you've got each other's cell phones and that's how it works. But if all calls are directed through a receptionist or go to a voicemail, whatever it may be for your community, it allows you to have time to respond. We do always want to be responsive, but ideally we don't have reporters directly calling someone that is a spokesperson. Again, that's probably wishful thinking in the roles that you are all in, but it is always appropriate to say, I can't do that right at this minute, but let's find a time.
Yeah. Jenna has a fantastic question about, do we have to do an interview if we've been asked? And I think that's a great topic to explore a little bit too. So Jenna, a couple of things to consider. One, there may be expectations of your municipality or your municipal leaders. So I think it's really important to have that conversation within your community and within the leadership of your community to see what the expectations may be there. From our standpoint, we generally encourage, I'll say, responsiveness with media, because that's how you build relationships. Oftentimes, if you sort of stonewall them or you never respond to their questions or their emails or whatever it is, you're really going to get off on the wrong foot with that. They won't just go away. That's the reality. And you're going to kind of create a tense relationship with that reporter, which can lead to unfavorable reporting, candidly. So from our standpoint, we always encourage responsiveness to a reporter. Now, that responsiveness may be exactly what Elizabeth said, which is, I can't jump on I'm in the middle of 3 things right now. Can you give me your number. I'll get back to you, or give me your email. I'll get back to you with a time that may work better for me. Oh, and by the way, what are you looking to talk about? So if they give you a couple, oh, well, I just have some questions specifically about absentee ballots or the Dropbox issue or whatever it is, they may give you a sense of something really specific that they want to talk about. Based on that, you can decide, maybe I'm just going to send them an email with a quick statement, again, 2 sentences about what the Wisconsin Election Commission just decided about drop boxes. Maybe that, again, is an easier way to still be responsive to them, but not put yourself in an interview situation. Consider that. That is definitely an option for you. You can move forward with an interview. Again, we encourage responsiveness of some kind, or if it's a situation where maybe you're not the best person, you can say to that reporter, I really appreciate your question, but actually I think you'd be better directing that question to the Wisconsin Election Commission, because they're making the decision on that directly. So a couple of options to think about as an alternative to an interview.
Couple other questions coming in are, are reporters generally open to sharing questions? That's a good question. It depends. First off, it doesn't hurt to ask, but often you'll be more successful if you ask for the theme or the topic of what they'd like to discuss versus actual specific questions. Very few reporters will send a list of, here are the 5 questions I'm going to ask you. But to Lori's point, might say, what I want to talk about is what happened in Glendale. And then you can prepare for that interview or decide to issue a written statement.
And sometimes, they won't give you the specific questions, but more often than not, they'll give you some general direction of where they're looking to go.
Yep. Another question, Lori, this is a tough one. What if you've done all the right things, but the reporter keeps circling back and wants direct response to their negative question? I think the key, go ahead, Lori.
No, yes. And that is a good question. Sorry, I'm not seeing all of the questions here, so I didn't see that one pop up. I think in that circumstance, it's again, the keys: remain calm. Don't let them put you on the defensive, right? They can feel if you are, if you're getting angry, candidly. And I think it's very fair to say, you can repeat the same response. I have been in situations where, again, it feels a little awkward and it feels a little tense, but we've repeated the same response over and over. And if the reporter keeps going for something else, you can say, with all due respect, I know you have a job to do, but I feel like I've answered your question. Can we move on to the next question, please? You can also just say, you know what, I'm at time. I've got to move on to my next meeting. If you don't have any other questions, I feel like I've given you everything, all of the important information that you need today. You kind of wrap it up with something like a closure sentence like that, but don't feel pressure to go negative, because again, that is clickbait. That is not because it's important information that citizens need. That is, potentially to feed a controversial headline, and that we're all trying to avoid that.
We've got another question in. I've had a reporter tell me that they were going to do an interview on one topic, and that's how they started the interview, but it ultimately wasn't the topic that they really wanted to discuss, and it turned into something else. What is our guidance there? I think first off, know the news in your community is really important. Just stay up to date so you know some of those topics. In some cases, it might be a topic that you're comfortable talking about, or it's good news for the city. Often, if it is something that a reporter's kind of being sneaky and throwing a question in there, it's appropriate to say, I really want to stick to the topic of this interview that we discussed. So if you have any questions related to the upcoming election, I'd be happy to answer those. That is an absolutely appropriate response.
Mm-hmm. If you're not the right person, if they're sneaking in questions that are appropriate for a different municipal leader, it's totally appropriate to say, that question is better directed at XYZ person. So I'm really here today to focus on the topic of election security, but I can let them know that you have this question and have them get back to you about it, something of that nature, to kind of defer and go in that direction. I agree with everything Elizabeth said. And lastly, I would say, remember that when you work with that particular reporter. So the next time that they call you back, it's also, again, as you continue to do your work in these communities and work in these municipalities, this is a relationship between you and the reporter, right? You have something that they need, and they are an important tool that you can use to get key messages out to your community. So know that you both have power in this relationship. So if that reporter misrepresents where they're trying to go and then puts you in an uncomfortable place, you may have to navigate your way through it, but remember it that the next time that reporter calls and says, hey, I'd love an interview, or hey, will you give me that story? It's very fair for you to say, actually, Tom, I'm a little reluctant to sit down and do an interview with you because last time you ended up taking it in a direction that really wasn't focused on just election security. So I'll send you a statement about that topic, or I'll send you our position. It's okay for you to have that conversation with them. I think hopefully it leads to stronger relationships, keeping that person honest as well.
Great. Just doing a bit of a time check here. We'll keep our eyes peeled for any additional questions coming through, but do want to open it up. If you've got questions or comments about today's time together, maybe something that was new to you or something you learned, or certainly any questions, we'll take those now. Not all at once, everyone.
I know, this has been a great group though. You have very good, very relevant questions.
And I love that we've been able to kind of intersperse them as we've been going along. So thank you for sending those through.
I just want to reiterate that the league will share this recording, we'll share the slides, we'll share the handout again, and you'll have access to all of this after the fact. So if you practice, if you want to just read through everything again, you can. Jenna put in the chat, there's a lot of anxiety about this issue. So do connect with your peer groups, whether it's through the league or maybe through the Clerks Association, and practice where you need to, and ask them what they're sharing, what they're saying. Looks like we're getting some questions in.
Yep, we've got a question here. In my experience, buzzwords like illegal, safe and secure, etc., tend to be polarizing depending on the audience. What is a good way to bridge the polarization that this type of language can unintentionally create?
Can you repeat the words?
Illegal and safe and secure.
Yeah. And again, I think it's as we demonstrated with the scenario that we went through, there are some of those words absolutely that we would agree, like let's take those off the table, right? So if you get something that is especially in a negative context like illegal, let's transition that to talking about eligible voters, right? Let's take it in a positive direction. However, words like safe and secure, just because they are, that is at the very core of what we're talking about. Those are, I think those are words that we need to continue to use, because I do think that they really reinforce the integrity of the system. So we talk about election security again, and to the point, there was a slide earlier in the presentation where we talked about trusted messengers and some of that ad council polling that was done. The words like safety and security actually in that poll generally pulled fairly high as being trusted by people. I totally understand that they can be seen as buzzwords, but I would say as a rule of thumb, avoid the ones that have negative connotations. The ones that have positive connotations, I think are really important that we don't allow those to become demonized.
I think it's also appropriate to acknowledge that, like to almost use it as a flag, to say, elections are safe and secure. And those aren't just words. Here's what we mean by that. So even turn that to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
We're getting some really positive remarks in the chat. So really great. Thank you so much. Very informative. Not just election issues, but in general, just getting connected to the media. Very helpful. We'll get some more. things in the chat here from everyone. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in. We're still here for you. We're still ready to answer.
Absolutely. Jennifer, for what it's worth, one of the most fun videos that we show in media training is literally, and it wasn't an election scenario, but it was a woman who worked behind the front desk at a real estate company. The media walked in and she literally hid behind her desk, and they filmed it and they showed it on air. So yes, hopefully that's not actually literal, but I would that has actually made the news in the past, and yes, it was pretty humorous.
Sherry asked a question about clerks credit. I will reach out to the Clerks Association and double check. We didn't think about that ahead of time. I apologize. It's very likely. We have a great working relationship with them, and if that's the case, then we'll send it out to everyone who registered.
Again, and just to reiterate, I think hopefully this was a good resource for you all today. I know many of you will likely download the resource from the league. Keep that a dynamic document, right? We know that in your world, things are changing, rulings are changing, how you all have to navigate elections will continue to change probably on a weekly basis as we continue to move into election season. So I do think it's really helpful that you continue to work with your network here. Add new talking points to that document as you go through, right? As, again, I referenced this once just because I heard it yesterday, but as new information comes to light on how ballot boxes are to be used, for example, know that things like those key facts will be a dynamic document for you all. So, make sure you kind of don't hesitate to keep that document current for yourself and refer to it often as whether you're in situations with a media interview or you're just going to you're going to a community event, you're going to the church picnic this weekend and you'll get questions. It's something that's really good to just kind of stay fresh on.
There's a question in the chat about what are our thoughts on press releases providing the facts of known topics prior to elections? This commenter says that this has been helpful in the past. I think it's a great idea. Again, this could be done in conjunction with you sending out a welcome note to have them come in and take B-roll. We know you're going to cover elections. We know this is a hot topic. Here are some ways that we can help. First off, if you'd like to come in and capture some B-roll, we would be happy to coordinate that. And also wanted to proactively provide you with some information on some topics that I am sure you are going to cover in the coming weeks and months, and then providing some of those key messages.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, I love that idea as well. It doesn't even, you can format it as a press release. You can literally just format it as a key fact sheet, things you need to know going into this election, and send it off to your friends in the media as well that are local. So, and in many cases that will probably proactively answer. Again, we go back to that proactive versus reactive slide that we went. In many cases, you're probably proactively answering a lot of questions that the reporter will have. So they may just quote your fact sheet or your press release directly and not then make the phone call or ask you for the interview because you proactively gave them that information. I think that's great.
Love that idea, Michelle. 10 fun facts about elections. Yeah, I mean, use your municipality social media channels, share the league videos. There are some great resources already out there, or, create your own for your municipality. That's great.
And not just that, but to the extent, again, that you're comfortable inviting media in to take B-roll, inviting media in on election day and say, please, doors are open. Come, you're free to come here. You're free to see people navigate the process. maybe there's even a poll observer or election worker that maybe they want to interview them as opposed to interviewing you as well about the process that they've gone through. If that's something that you're comfortable with and you feel like that person will reflect well on the system, by all means, again, I think the media, any level of transparency that you're offering to the media builds that trust between you and the reporter and is likely to lead to more accurate, informative, good coverage.
Great. If our participants do have questions after this, after we end today, are you available? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit our website, millercommunications.com, and find our contact information there. That's probably the easiest route. Feel free to send us a note.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Well, again, thank you so much to the League for facilitating this. We can't say enough about our respect for you all as municipal officials. I have to also say, shout out to the number of ladies that are doing this work and that are on this call today. Very impressive group. So here to be a resource for you as you continue to do this really important work in our communities.
Awesome.
There's a funny B-roll moment in the chat. I love that.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today. We had great participation numbers. I want to thank Mueller Communications for hanging out with us and really positive feedback. I think my notes on that were prepare ahead of time, big idea up front, stay positive, and it's okay to not fill the silence and throw a question back. And we all need to practice that bridging and flagging. So I think those are my takeaways here.
Great.
Thank you so much.
You're a great student. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.